Very excited to be here, honestly, and I'm glad finally the team has done a lot of effort. Raul, Sefala, and others. A conversation for months, and finally, you guys are here. Very glad. And today, I want to share some of the things I learned over the years. I know it's a keynote, it's a summer school, but also I'm an African. We were having a conversation on Friday with Raul and Sefala, trying to see what kind of content may be appealing for you. So it's like a mix of different things. I hope that will give a diverse perspective. So let me start here. As Sefala mentioned, a bit of my career trajectory. I am from Ethiopia, just next door to Kenya first, where I did my undergrad, and I moved to Europe, and I tried to move around different labs, different universities, just try to work, but more importantly, try to connect with people, understand the culture, and so on. So I usually say it as a fun fact. I lived, worked, or interned in 5 European countries before I moved back here. Some of the institutions, as you saw there, starting from two local universities in Ethiopia, where I studied and a bit worked, but also the other institutions where I did my postgraduate studies, internship, and others. The highlights on the east side of Asia is China and Vietnam, where I had also the opportunity to work in a collaborative project while I was in the UK. So this seems like more of a career trajectory, and more than the educational part, more than what I learned. As I said, the people side is always more interesting for me, and then that's still valuable having that experience across different regions. Again, this is computer vision summer school, which is my PhD topic. But when I tried to think of this opportunity, I was thinking, what could I share with these young, smart people who could do much better going forward? And I tried to frame it as AI solution development, which is a topic more or less I have been working since my internship 12, 13 years ago in Lisbon. And then once you try to develop solution for a particular problem, and then I start to be more interested in what we call trustworthy AI. Okay, we have data, we have problem, we can develop model, but is it trustworthy? That's the kind of interest I had for more or less the last 5 years, specifically while I was at IBM Research. Even, Celia, which was my former colleague at IBM, sort of conversation we were having. AI model, is the data fair? Is the model is doing as is expected, and so on. Then I moved to Microsoft, where I'm leading the AI for Good Lab, and it's good to develop the solution. It's good to make sure that the model is trustworthy, but are you trying to make an impact on the ground? And this is beyond just the technology, the solution, the code you develop, but as a related challenge, trying to bring a solution into the ground so that and the agriculture ministry or health professional would definitely use solutions. So my conversation would circle around these three components. First, maybe closer to you, AI solution development, whether it's computer vision, time series, whatsoever. Second, trustworthiness of it. Third, are we trying to really make an impact of the solution, right? If you have any questions, of course, pause, raise your hand at any time in the conversation. I will be happy to address. So just to tell you that I am also a bit computer vision in background, I just want to share my PhD thesis, which was actually similar to the practical we have been doing lately. It's trying to understand human activity, most importantly, ambulatory activities from what we call first-person vision. I don't know if you remember 2014, where Google Glass was a thing. You have wearable cameras and you try to move around and understand. But you know that videos have that privacy issue and all that. But without putting yourself in the scenery, do you understand what kind of activity you are doing? by using that ego vision or first-person vision. And some of the topics I came across was like understanding motion from video. So it's not mostly the content, but also the motion, the optical flow. I think Celia mentioned last time to understand those activities, but also 2014 deep learning for video was not that very mature area. So we were trying to use how we can apply transfer learning so that the video would be transcribed into sort of two-dimensional imagery so that we can apply transfer learning from ImageNet and so on. And we created a bit of data sets on first-person vision activity. And this was actually one of my visiting professor in Barcelona who was willing enough to do data collection for me. And that's how you do usually data collection for PhD, but we may discuss later how important, such a simple data collection probably may not always the best way to collect data and so on, but you know that I have that computer vision background. Then I moved into understanding different disease conditions. This is part of my postdoc at Oxford, where you have time series data coming from wearable sensors like ECG, PPGs that takes electrical activity and oxygen saturation level for a patient, and you try to understand, different disease categories. What makes it this sort of project different from my PhD topic, for example, was the practicality of it, right? It's not just a research. This work was done in collaboration with people in Guangdong, China, and Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Then you realize that actually, one thing is to just collect funny data for your PhD and do some model paper, but then you start to work with people, clinicians who has better understanding of the problem. And then I realized actually what's important, right? It's not the model, it's not the paper, but working with those clinicians, you realize how much you don't know about the problem, right? And these are similar approach as earlier, but maybe you try to understand, work with real sensors. When you have sensor, you have noise, all those different challenge, variation across patients. For the first disease, hand, foot, mouth, usually it affects children, and you put wearable sensor on children, you know how they react. And that was not part of your research, but that will become a practical problem you need to address because children move, they unplug the wearable sensor, and so on. All right. And then back to Africa. So postgraduate study, postdoc, and all that, then of course I want to come to the continent most of you belong to, actually all of you at this moment in time. Why? You realize that when you work with problems, there is technology, and we have a tremendous opportunity to use technology to solve actually practical problems in the continent. And that's like a dream for, an African, for anyone, because you learn, you develop, and then the practicality of it is actually, are you using it to make things better, closer to home? And these are some of the snapshots of how great opportunities we have. And of course, we have a great grassroots community, as you know. I know because he was here, deep learning in Dawa, and Sefala probably have told a few other things. The African way, we have different grassroots community when you work things together, all right? But having these 2 points in mind, we have also unique challenges in the global south and in Africa. If you mention, the number of people trying to use AI data science for practical problems, there is a big deviation, as you see, but also we talk about computer vision, AI, deep learning, but when you think about even connectivity from internet perspective, from electricity perspective, we have still a very significant challenge in the continent, right? You know how climate change is becoming more severe and severe in its impacts, but then you realize that, of course, UN Security Council or the director may say, we need to inform people a disaster is happening, whether it is flood, whether it is earthquake, 72 hours before. You come to Africa, you don't even have internet, you don't have connectivity. as we may discuss later, you don't even know where people live in the continent because not everyone lives in cities and towns, right? So how you can connect those challenges is a key, interesting perspective to have in mind. If you zoom out from Africa, it's not just African problem. We have numerous challenges at the moment, whether it's facing people, children, female, animals facing extinction. And this is where you pause. You do research, great. You do paper, great. But are you trying to really use your effort, time, PhD, master's thesis to help understand some of these problems and potentially help solve them because the problems are real, right? And that's what I will keep saying many times today. What you do, try to connect is what's happening in the ground. And that is a real way to make an impact and going forward, right? Then nowadays, you know that once you have data, you could train model, you could have some nice results, some papers as well. But again, is the model trustworthy? Trustworthiness means there is different way of interpreting it, maybe lately, different synonyms, responsible, ethical, different ways. But for me, the simple way of understanding is that you develop something from your research lab, from your university, you go to finance, to the bank or the health ministry. Will people know, feel at ease to deploy, to use that solution? It's not just as a black box, but as a tool that could augment their decision making, their day-to-day activity. And that's what I mean by trustworthy AI. What if we don't satisfy that requirement? You know probably more than I do all those examples out there where a particular AI model has been picked for a wrong reason. One of the challenge even in Africa, you know, that you could have different models trained on data outside Africa, designed by people not aware of the local context. And it's very common to see those models keep suffering when you try to implement them in local context. And land cover maps is one of those examples. And in fact, Burak, raise your hand, who is part of my team, is working on these topics because it's real. You could say, oh, we have this map from European Space Agency whatsoever, bring it to Rwanda, a small country with different crops on one land. The problem is different, right? More than that, of course, there is some adverse impacts of solutions, you know, when they didn't include the right context when designed so that they will not working, but also adversely impact a certain segment of population. That's obvious. So this is what we mean by data model output is a simple pipeline, but the trustworthiness should be there so that it could actually deployed on the ground for positive societal impact. In fact, one of my favorite story is COVID-19. In COVID-19, you could count the number of papers that have been published during that time. Everyone trying to understand COVID from this signal, from coughing, from imagery, from, you know, all those different perspectives. And someone did a study of at least 300 papers of this, and they found out, I think they published it in Nature. All of them have major flaws, and they cannot be deployed clinically, right? And then think about your research. These 300 papers, modules, are those that are published in scientific papers for COVID. And none of them were clinically fit to be deployed. And this is the kind of idea what I mean by trustworthiness, right? Could it be used on the ground? Could someone use it to make a decision making? And of course, in Africa, you also have a limited resource, limited people. So you cannot afford to spend your 4 years, 5 years time budget to realize finally it's just a paper with no impact. And the more we are aware of this, when we start our research, when we do our experiments, you know, more likely we will do something impactful. The specifics of trustworthiness, maybe it's discussed quite often in this summer school, could have different flavors: bias, fairness, explainability of the decision-making process, the privacy, accountability, and so on. And each has different research topics, but I will not go much into detail because Celia already mentioned in detail one of the robustness, but you could pick any of this. And we may have even more requirements going forward because still we don't have a very clear idea of how we can regulate AI. What is acceptable in Kenya may be different in South Africa or in Singapore. This list may grow up, but again, as far as you are informed, try to think of those key characteristics whenever you are trying to develop an AI solution, right? Then my sub focus on my area of interest in that trustworthiness, fairness is actually data, because it's very clear that every AI pipeline takes certain data where you train your model. And probably understanding the model, actually developing the model is not the difficult part nowadays. I think when we did this paper, I think in 2022, we already identified that automated machine learning techniques are already competitive to any new model you may design. But this further motivates why we need to focus on the data part. As they say, garbage in is garbage out. Question? So automobile techniques means, I think IBM has one, maybe other institutions the same. You could just develop your data and feed them, and directly they will pick a model for you and give. Actually, do I have the result somewhere? No. And then you could just automate it without you trying to design a model, fine-tuning it. Then from the data, you could pick any automated machine learning pipeline. And when you project into data, they will always give you a competitive result. And we checked this with a computer vision task, actually. And this is the idea of to say, developing that neural architecture is not the biggest thing to worry about. Even those available out there could just give you a competitive performance than what you fine-tuned with your own loss function whatsoever. There is no big difference between you spending your time designing a model and someone just use automated ML technique to do the same forecasting or prediction pipeline. That's one motivation. But at the same time, the garbage in, garbage out is the same. Usually as a student, as a researcher, you always think that I have this problem. Where is the data? Which university has a data set? You download somewhere and trying to project that. Do you spend enough time trying to understand the data? Is another key aspect you can take from the conversation. In details, the data part is critical, right? Because it has a lot of information in it. That may be representation, misannotation, the quality of the data, who annotated it, what is the agreement, disagreement between the domain expert, if even the data is annotated by the domain expert for that matter. Out of distribution, adversarials, you could have a lot of diversity just by focusing and understanding the data you are going to use for AI pipeline. That's why I always say data is the first stop to check the trustworthiness, the practicality of your solution. But usually, you just download data and then shoot your model onto it, right? We, at IBM Research, we did diverse set of research across different domains, but more importantly on healthcare, trying to understand the systematic deviations in data. I will not go much in detail because this is computer vision summer school, but the maternal newborn child health, this is a leading cause for health disparity in the continent, where newborns have catastrophic impact just, since they were born in, I don't know if you know, neonatal days, which is a days happening for newborns in 28 days and then so on. So practical challenge we had with, I think this work was done with Gates Foundation. You say that always children mortality is going down over the years. In Nigeria, in 2002, it was like 20%. Now we have 12%. That's great. But the question is, are there still subpopulation in Nigeria where the problem is still worse? Average, I think it has been told many times, average way of representing, understanding things are very, very, skeptical in a way because it hides those subpopulations that are forgotten somewhere. And we try to understand those diverse set of populations that are still struggling with the problem, even if we know country-wise there is a downward pattern for maternal newborn child health. This one is interesting. It was Better Birth Study. Has anyone of you heard about this intervention from WHO? Better Birth Study? So this is an intervention designed by World Health Organization, WHO. They say, okay, maternal newborn child health is very problematic. Then let's bring domain expert and design an intervention. That intervention helps clinicians and care providers to follow when they treat pregnant women and newborn babies. Once you design the intervention, what you do next, you try to understand whether that intervention actually makes a difference on a randomized controlled trial study. The work was actually led by Harvard University, and they did it in India. A lot of money, a lot of time, and they identified finally, actually this intervention didn't help at all. Because it's a randomized controlled trial, including 160,000 females, 80,000 in each arm, and identified the intervention actually didn't help on the ground, which is fine, because not every intervention works, right? But one of the questions we try to address is that even if it doesn't work globally, is there a segment of population? Is there a segment of mothers this intervention actually helped? That's actually the work we did, again, in collaboration with those people who made the first study. And we identified certain data qualities, but also you identified, even if it doesn't work all the time, actually you identify for mothers with certain characteristics this intervention works. And this idea gives you why the intervention work and potential informs the next intervention procedure, because now you have better understanding of where it works, where it doesn't work. And this aligns with that systematic deviation when I say certain groups, certain characteristics of people may behave differently in your data space. And I haven't discussed about model, right? I discussed about you have this data from 160,000 people that WHO spent 5 years and millions of dollars. Can we get something useful from that? That was the intention. And we discussed out of distribution last time with Celia, but I will not go into detail. But something we study was trying to understand. We know that dermatology data sets are skewed. They don't usually include people of color in their data set. Then when you train a model, the output will be tricky. But we go beyond that. And this is the work we did with Stanford University. Let's check actually the academic books that are being used in top medical schools in the US and see how do they behave. And we found that maximum, they have 10% of examples of image that are not Caucasian. So this is not a number game. This is not about representation. The idea is forget the model. If you are a dermatologist, an expert trained on medical school on a data, which textbooks in this case, that is skewed, your understanding of that disease is skewed and you don't provide competitive quality for people you have the example for and for people you do not have the example for. And I was surprised to understand yesterday or so, now Stanford University actually started the first medicine program that's focused on skin color, which are minorities. And this is a way of impact. I know Asala is here. She worked with us, and Roxana, which is also our co-author in that paper we wrote, right? It started with understanding data in data sets. And we go beyond what? Academic textbooks. And we prove that there is some irregularities there. This kind of analysis helped to finally come up with such intervention, right? So that now people are aware when they do their studies, their research, they could try to mitigate that challenge. And this is one way of working on important problem, because we work on such problem because the domain experts know there is a gap, and we prove it across different research work. And this is the kind of output I just saw yesterday. What did we discuss so far? I told you how I move around Europe first, but importantly, how solution development is easy. And we try to understand what do we mean by trustworthy AI with clear examples so that people could use it. And from trustworthy AI, different key characteristics, I focused on data because that's the very critical component of an AI pipeline. In data, there are different problems that may arise. And I try to show that across healthcare examples for now, but it gives you whether it's skewed, low quality, robustness, and so on. And when we say data, it's just beyond the data set that's just fine-tuned for the model, including academic textbooks and other traditional data sources we use to train the model. Because things are interconnected, right? Data is not just the data set you download, but also, if you think about it, if the academic material, the traditional data sources are skewed, the domain expert understanding is skewed. And this domain expert is going to annotate your data even for your AI pipeline. And you take that AI data to your pipeline and try to use some predictions or for decision making. And the impact is quite complex. And we need to be aware of wherever data, whatever data you are using, where does that come from, who collected it, who annotated it, and all those different characteristics. Sorry, question.
So regarding the skin as an example, so do we say trust was AI because it's given a skin, it was able to accurately say it's melanoma, for example? Would you say that that is what is trustworthy AI in that context of medical imaging?
Can you elaborate? I just want to make sure you understand the question before I answer.
Okay, so one of the conditions of the skin is melanoma, right? So given that it was able to accurately predict its melanoma, is when we're saying this is trustworthy AI, or because it was being because of the data set that was being collected.
So let me rephrase it. So are we saying the solution is trustworthy if it accurately predicts the skin condition it is?
Yes, but the catchphrase here is like in a medical setting.
That's a good question. So my answer would be no. The fact that just the accuracy is a guarantee for trustworthiness. Maybe it's just one tiny component of it. Yeah. Actually, this is what we all do, right? We do data model and we have AUC of 0.95. We feel good. That's not exactly the bottom line of trustworthiness. Even if you are accurate, what does even accurate mean? Are you 100% accurate? What is uncertainty? You know, you need to interpret beyond that. And more importantly, that trustworthiness should also, as I mentioned, gives that explainability power. And if that a particular data comes with a different medical device, for example, do you get the same accuracy? So it's multidimensional. And there is no, as I said, those lists of trustworthiness are for now. And if you want to deploy a solution in different countries, they will come up with their own way of ensuring the solution is trustworthy, their own, requirement. And that scope would be broader. I'm not saying you will develop a perfect trustworthy AI solution. We will never. No. But the idea is keep in mind what will be the challenges, what could go wrong from the data, from the model, from the output, from interpreting it, and how even the domain experts think about it it could sometimes go even ethical if we go that direction. But my short answer is like, no, trustworthiness is just not accuracy. It has different dimensions, and we need to be aware of that first as researchers, as developers, and many other people will come up with their even more question if you try to work with domain expert and so on. Let me stop there.
Okay, yeah. I was just thinking that because medicine seems to not be an exact science in a way that the doctors themselves, the same diagnosis they might make, given the same image, next, they might make different diagnoses. Like, so it means there's a problem with labeling of the data. And then we cannot say because they're experts from institution X label, it is not guaranteed that their labels are okay, right? So it seems like never ending kind of situation because we'll never have like exact labels to this kind of situation.
Exactly. It will never be like a well-defined and ending solution. I mean, the academic material I mentioned, the doctor may make a mistake. Why he made a mistake? Why does he have that bias? It goes beyond just, the data that the domain expert and all that. So again, my suggestion is try to be aware of all these challenges we may have, because as a researcher, usually we spend less time even understanding the data going forward. Is that a question too?
I guess it's more just to add on to that, but I guess this is more similar to like how in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were doing a really bad job of diagnosing autism in females because the original data that they collected studying the disease was almost entirely on young boys. So they actually thought that this was a disease that only boys could get. It's more similar to that, right?
Yeah, we can mention a few examples, but just for the time, yeah, we know we have always a good experience how things go wrong from the domain expert, sometimes even for the medical device, right? You know that oxygen saturation level that was designed, patented in Japan, when you bring it into people of color, the way that device communicates with the light, the condition of the light in your skin, it differs. So usually you give women of color patients more like less oxygen than they need because the device has skewed. We have different many examples, and I'm not saying these are learning opportunities for us, but when you go forward, yeah, we could think of all those how things could go wrong. We can never bring that perfect solution, but at least we could minimize those unwanted consequences or potentially improve the positive impact of that particular solution. Have a question?
Yeah, so my question is simple. Before I get confused, I want the definition of two things and then also the application of both of them in industrial settings. What is trustworthy AI and what is explainable AI, and how do you evaluate both of them on the industry?
So what's trustworthy AI and what's explainable AI? As I said, um, in IBM, we do to say trustworthy AI. In Microsoft, we call it responsible AI. They have a very similar structure, but as I said, the idea is, in nutshell, is a solution something you trust, you believe, so as a decision maker, so that you could, use it willingly, because we know that solutions are being used in different sectors and people consider it as a black box model. That's not trustworthy for me. Trustworthy is you are a decision maker. You are using an AI solution she developed for you, but you know what could go wrong, what's go right, so that you trust the solution because it satisfies all the requirements we mentioned earlier so that you could use it. And again, it has ethical, legal, technical perspectives in it, and that may differ across the other. But at the end of the day is it the solution? It will not be always perfect, trustworthy, something you trust to make a decision making, so that you know also what could go wrong, what could go right. Explainability in a simple term is, given a data, you have an output. Can you explain what you get, why you get that particular output from your data? That's the simplest definition of explainability. So you don't treat us, usually I go to different sectors and this is what the model gives us. That's a good sign of no explainability at all. Explainability means you can explain, the model could explain, or the way it designed could tell you how it come up with certain decisions given that input. And that's what I mean, explainability. All right, Rao.
Thanks a lot. I was wondering, so since you're talking about trustworthy AI, this is quite close. I know it's quite different, a bit different, but quite close to fairness, right? And I was wondering if when you develop the pipelines and when you collect data, you also pay attention to labeling, processing pipeline. And how do you do that? Because we know that at the end of the day, everyone is relying on workers very badly paid. Is it something that you account for during the process of the data set creation? How?
A good question. You'll always depend on people. I mean, theoretically, is different from what you face practically. Let me give you actually, I don't know, a practical example where I'm facing, at least at the moment. We are working with Kenya Space Agency trying to develop land cover maps for one of the regions in Kenya. And as I may discuss next, one of the practicality of trying to provide impact is involve people at the very stage. And that involvement begins with one example. Okay, we have this imagery. You are domain experts. Can you annotate it? A few examples for the model. And of course, that's great. You understand from each other, you learn. Finally, when I tried to use it for my pipeline, I found out not all the labels are right. I'm not a domain expert in agriculture, but you could see when you ask people to annotate, people have a different view of, committing that instruction, and then you see the label. Some of them are wrong, and you can. Then the question comes with, still some of them are useful. It's still important to involve partners in your pipeline. Otherwise, you cannot say, don't worry, I have the data, I have the model, just wait for my solution. That's the wrong way of doing the solution. Then you could discuss that and you try to annotate over and over again. That's one approach. Two, that problem also bring a kind of a new research question. How do we improve the efficiency of these labels, knowing that they are not perfect? You try to play with, segment the anything model and all others so that you could improve that labeling issue. So again, this is a practical example. You always depend on people, domain expertise, but that communication, that relationship is not always perfect. It's not, they don't exactly think the way you think, neither do you think the way they think. So, but the important thing, as I may discuss later, is keep that conversation together, learn from each other and going forward. Again, you will not provide the perfect data, the perfect label, but with that interaction, you learn from each other, you build the relationship, which is very critical component of making the solution impactful going forward. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers. So we discussed about AI solution, trustworthiness. Now I'm going to focus more on impact. When we say impact, usually we say we are at a very tricky time, and this doesn't actually specifically focus on even AI. You just zoom out and understand it as a technology itself. And what kind of impact are you going to achieve? And we know that it's a great time for a technology that is doing great things across different sectors. But technology, we know that, may also sometimes bring that adverse, unwanted impact. That sometimes it could even result in amplifying inequality across our populations, countries, locations, subgroup of people. And AI is a tiny, maybe now bigger component of the technology paradigm I try to address. And this is what AI for Good Love is trying to do. It's not the solution, trustworthy, that is by default important, as we discussed so far. But are you trying to make an impact? And this is a team, it's not big, this is a global team, but we try to work on problems that are meaningful, at least for us, that are fundamental. And we know that most of us are AI researchers who has no knowledge about problems on the ground. Then we start working with domain knowledge experts. But the topics are very focused: healthcare, climate change, conservation, digital equity, and so on. If I zoom it into the Africa team, I don't know, we are a team of 5 sitting in this building, trying to work on similar problems. But again, on that category, we specifically focus on disaster, population, food and water security, sustainability, and conservation. If you are African, or if you know the context, you know there is no thing more important than food and water security or these problems. Now we try to bring all those conversations we had discussed so far into actually working on those problems. These are, I may not probably have time to go in details for each of them. These are the projects we do, led by scientists, people working in the team in this building. Proudly, most of us are even African. Food and water security, Gilles, can you raise your hand? Sitting at the background. He works on identifying the expansion of agriculture and irrigation in central Kenya around Meru. Sometimes I'm surprised by how complex real life problem is. You think food security, what do you need? Food. For food, you need to do more agriculture, right? So expand the agriculture space, expand the area so that you maximize your yield. Food security solve it. We think as non-domain experts that way. And actually it's no. When you expand the agriculture space, you are destroying the ecosystem, the habitats, the forests. And then just to satisfy food security short term, you are going to use irrigation everywhere, which is using the water resource available in that region. And that effort will bring water insecurity, conflict among communities, because you are tapping all the water early before it reaches to the communities. And pause there. You say food security, agriculture, let's expand irrigation, but it has a catastrophic problem. And this is what Gilles is doing in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, trying to understand the dynamics. To understand the problem, you need to understand how it changes over time. You need to know what's happening on the ground. And this is one project we are doing, trying to understand this rapid expansion of agriculture and irrigation pattern. Then organizations like the Nature Conservancy, CITRAD may come up with the right intervention because they are the domain experts. They know what to do if you give them that insight. And we, as researchers, AI scientists, our task is always to augment the capability of those domain experts who knows the problem better. Another problem, I don't know if Akram is here, is wildlife conflict. How many of you went to Masai Mara? I know Raul, did you go? Masai Mara? No. Anyone who has ever visited Masai Mara? Great. Masai Mara, as you know, is a great tourist destination because of its rich wildlife. Good. When does the problem start? According to Kenya Wildlife Trust and Smithsonian Institute, actually now people are moving closer to the Masai Mara because expanding agriculture, settlement, then there is a conflict happening between the wildlife and the population nearby. What's the problem? Of course, a lion comes and attack your cattle. For the pastoralists living in that area, cattle is your asset. What do? You revenge back. You put poison. And then a lot of wildlife die. So Kenya Wildlife Trust in the past, they tried to mitigate this solution. First, they say, if your cattle is attacked by a lion, we will compensate you. But people usually play the system so that you could push your old cattle so that you could get compensated and so on. The right way to do that is for Kenya Wildlife Trust first to understand the risk areas where people and these settlements, they call them Boma, where people there keep their environment, trying to understand from satellite imagery the risk profile. And this is geospatial machine learning pipeline where you take satellite imagery, you do all the computer vision task, train a semantic segmentation model, and you give output. But that's not the story I'm telling you, right? The story is how we could use those skills you have to try to help people and organizations like Kenya Wildlife Trust to give them insight. At the end of the output is the data set. This is across this Masai Mara region over 10 years' time. This is a risk profile you need to be aware. So that those organizations could do intervention, which means relocating some people or building a fence and so on. As AI researcher, you will be surprised to talk about wildlife conflict and building a fence. But that is the kind of impact I wanted to share with you, not the cool semantic segmentation model we use to develop this solution. I know I don't have time to go much into H. This is like another using satellite, not satellite, aerial photography taken during the colonial time, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, that are even forgotten in archives, museums, how we could use them to understand long-term environmental changes. And this is a work we will present at ISHKAI next week or so. Jules, he is also co-lead another work, I may dive into it, understanding population at risk. We have another project with Kenya Ministry of Health and AMREF, understanding malnutrition. Akram, he's working with CGIAR, trying to scale fertilizer recommendation. And I hope this was one of the asks from Sefala. What kind of project are you guys doing? This gives you, we are focused on those geospatial type problems because they are very practical to most of the problems we have in the continent, whether food security, water, conservation, whatsoever. But do you see what's consistent across these projects? Can anyone tell me something you see similar across all these projects? Social impact, one, but just from even the slides. Africa, two, still satellite imagery, three, diversity of problems, still no one got my favorite answer. Yeah, it's late, I don't blame you. Come again? People focused. That's like almost close. Every project we do, we have a collaborator on the ground. Even if we are a research team, we rarely say, this is a cool project, let's do a research on it. No. These people, they come to us first with a problem. Because as AI researcher, the way you understand the problem is different. And one way to ensure that your solution may be them, not you develop a solution and try to give it to them. And this is something I want to keep in mind. Any AI-related project that doesn't really involve at least domain experts to begin with, that's a tricky territory, right? Let me just dive into some of them. This is a real picture of Dolo Ado Liban in very south of Ethiopia and after a flood disaster. Right? When this thing happened, of course, you could think of as a researcher, what could we have done? You could forecast, you could provide early warning, and so on. We lost that opportunity. And such disasters happen everywhere, right? But at least once it happens, what do you want to do as a policy, a government development organization? You wanted to intervene and help people in time. But the problem Gilles is doing is we don't know where people are in the continent, in the global south. Not everyone live in Lagos, in Nairobi, in Addis, right? Majority in the remote areas, disconnected, marginalized. So if you don't know even where they are, how could you help them? Many countries try to do census. Census means you take sample, you estimate the population. But usually what you found out is those census are out of date, the quality is wrong, and they keep projecting over and over again. But you know that the African population is also dynamic, right? What you think today, it changes in 2 years, 3 years time. So the main problem is if you don't have a clear understanding of where people are, even on the ground, whatever intervention, design, policy you come up with rarely will make an impact because you don't have the base knowledge, right? And that's what this project is trying to do. This is one example usually we use in Zinda in Niger, where you see in 10 years' time, the population of that city doubled. Which actual census, which actual data could reflect this, spike in just 10 years' time? And again, we try to use similar technology from higher resolution satellite imagery. You could understand where buildings are in the first place with a collaboration with Planet and others. You try to see, this satellite imagery Planet, you could take a few times even in a week. That's the most up-to-date information you may have on the ground, and trying to analyze that and get the right information about people where they are living is up to you and up to us. But this is a kind of bringing technology, especially imagery, whatever we know, so that it could actually fill an existing gap on the ground, right? And as I said, I don't go much into details about the models and all that, but the process is you have satellite imagery and you do spatial machine learning on it. And we collaborate with Planet because they give us high quality satellite imagery. We build the models. Once we identify the buildings and the maps, the institutions like IHME in Washington State University help us to project that building density into population density map. Again, practical problem, trying to fill an existing gap, but with a collaboration with people with different experts. That is one ingredient, how we could provide, develop an impactful solution. Where did we know that such a solution is very practical? When the flood hits Kenya in May, which is like 2 months ago. The lab was the first one to provide the flood extent map for the whole Kenya for the government. And sometimes it's astonishing in a way. We have technology, we have solutions, we have the ecosystem, but Kenya hit by flood. And the government and similar organizations like Kenya Space Agency, Kenya Red Cross, they want to know which areas are heavily hit, what is the impact on infrastructures, schools, roads, whatsoever. And we try to give that solution quicker, like in 24 hours to the solution. If you follow our lab, usually we provide that insight wherever disaster happens for the first time, probably. And this is how you could make an impact. The model, probably every one of you know the kind of model unit with a ResNet backbone. We train it, test it, validate data. That's the story. But what is the problem we are working on? Who is using it? And when such practical thing happen, that solution become fruitful. They didn't go for the paper we wrote about it. They need the solution. They need the insight, right? And not only flood, but that such information could help to understand food insecurity, disease burden, population density. Once you have good data about people where they live, you could use it for many different downstream tasks, because majority of the things we do, we claim to do, is trying to improve people's life on the ground. And this solution is of course in progress. And I guess when it is finished, it will be probably available for anyone to use. This is the previous example I mentioned. What's the problem? The EU, most of you are probably from the EU, right? Raul, and not most. Okay, okay. From the organizers. Okay. EU come up with European Union anti-deforestation law. What does it say? Yeah, we can buy your coffee, we can buy your tea, but prove to me that it's not coming from a deforested land. Fair enough for sustainability from their point of view. The problem, the majority of farmers are small scale farmers. So if you ask a small scale farmer, typical African farmer, to prove that your land, your coffee didn't come from a deforested land, this is a gap. It's right because we don't need to deforest land, forestation. We need to keep them. But at the same time, who is affected? That small scale farmer that have produced 80% of the coffee. Or for Kenya, the top 10 markets are in Europe. There is a gap there. That's what Kenya Space Agency approached us. And we collaborate with also Clark University. Let's try to build land cover map. Even before deforestation, the agriculture ministry on this county told us we usually distribute fertilizers. People didn't ask because you don't know as a decision maker, as a policy maker, which areas are for maize, for cassava, for banana, for coffee, for tea. If you don't have that detailed knowledge, you just assume and then distribute fertilizer, and that must be not exactly right. So the first thing is let's build land cover map from high satellite resolution. At least you could try to map the whole county to say where are the buildings, the roads, the forest, the water areas, and so on. This way, at least you have a good understanding of your area, your county. Then if an investment came in, you know where to send the people. You know what you have on the ground. Then even the second question, the main one, deforestation came later. Some of you may think we have existing land cover maps already out there, right? But as I said earlier, those land cover maps out there, when you bring into the African context, usually we have a quality issue. We have a problem. So I know time is running up. Let me try to summarize. I said a lot about solution, trustworthiness, and impact. And I hope with the next slides, I try to summarize what are the things I learned in my trajectory, working as a team, working as different organizations on the ground. And this is what I call best practices for positive impact. The first one, we use it commonly in our lab. Prioritization is very important. We said we first send someone to the moon before we add wheels in our luggage, right? What I mean, get your prioritization right. You could be a researcher, PhD student. What kind of problem are you working on? Is that aligned with your value? Is it actually a problem you prioritize to solve? Prioritization is important. Second, maybe I already said it earlier. Partnership is key. No one can do it alone. The fact that you could run code doesn't mean that you know about cancer, you know about agriculture, you know about water security. Involve domain experts who knows the problem better. And your task is always to help them, augment them, save time, save money, save resource to make more informed decision. Clarity on a problem. If you see the title of each project, you could spend 3 hours trying to understand the problem itself because real life problem is complex and it connects with different branches. We have this example. We say disaster response, but what does disaster response mean? Is it immediate emergency response? Is it logical coordination? Is it health care? Is it data collection for the disaster and how you manage it? Is it the coordination and the governance? Is it the community engagement and support? Is it long-term recovery? Every project you think you are solving could have a very complex dimension, and good to spend enough time understanding that complexity, because ill posed, or if you don't understand it well, whatever you try to solve it probably is not actually solving the problem. Additional 3 point is a resource. When you work on a problem, you try to solve that given the existing resource on the ground. Some people say, oh, we don't have data. Okay, that's the realities and what kind of solution you develop. We don't have this challenge. We don't have this infrastructure for competing. Then your solution should be aware of the context, the kind of resource, the personnel, computing skills, whatever is necessary is there. So spend that time to understand the resource. End user. I see people, I'm trying to develop a solution that detects cancer. Who is going to use that solution really? People on at their home, the community health worker, the health ministry, who is actually going to sit in front of that solution to use it? Because it matters. The way you design your solution will different whether it's that policymaker at health ministry or that nurse in a rural clinical setting. Always under the same problem, probably try to develop the same solution, but exactly who is going to use my solution? You need to spend more time so that you could calibrate accordingly. Third, probably I said most impact. What are you trying to achieve really? AI is not a solution for everything. That should be clear. We need to understand, does this solution could be helped using AI? What are the resource, the end user, the prioritization, and the impact? If you automate a few things, but you also make people disproportionately out of the job, what kind of impact are you trying to achieve? The fact that you could just use AI as a hammer looking for a nail doesn't work. Impact is key. So I know this is a very summary slide. It's probably less on computer vision, but more on how we develop AI solution for practical context. Get your prioritization right. Make sure you understand the problem clearly, the end user, and the kind of impact you want to achieve. Then the trustworthiness issue I discussed in the between earlier came in. And something I also try to mention is data is a key component. I know model development is such good thing. I know a lot of techniques have been covered in summer school about different new algorithms, techniques to do things. But do we spend enough time on understanding the data? Because a lot could be found there. Finally, probably a bit exactly related, but I see that real life problem is complex. So the way you try to understand it is trying to have different perspective of that problem, which means try to use multimodal approach. Just using one stream of data and trying to solve a problem rarely works because problem is complex. That means you need different snapshot of the problem from different stream of data, whether it's a survey, whether it's time series, whether it's satellite imagery, whether it's what people are talking on social media whatsoever. You need to try to incorporate these diverse resources so that you could probably understand the problem better first. Then whatever comes next could have some future. I know I am over time, but this is my assignment for you all. Who knows who saw the TED talk from Dr. Ernesto Cirelli about the hippo story? I usually share it whenever I present to people, and it's more important for the majority of the summer school attendee. Yes, yes, that's a good one. But the story, Dr. Ernesto was an Italian sustainable development expert. He came to Mozambique as a part of NGO. No, Zambia. And they see Zambezi River, right? And they say, very fertile land. Why don't you grow tomatoes agriculture? It's the way usually we think we understand the problem, and development organizations came in and try to tell people what they should do. And the farmers in that area say, okay. And they try to even give some money so that people could come and farm. It's a great area, fertile, the river, and beautiful tomatoes have come out. Almost in 2 months' time before the harvest, what happened? The hippos from the river came in and destroyed it overnight. And Ernesto brought all the farmers, the community, and they say, the hippos. And they say, yeah, we know. And he said, why didn't you tell us when we farm, we spend money, the tomatoes? They say, you didn't ask, right? So my assignment for you all is to ask. It's not people are wrong in a way, but they don't have the context. I'm telling you from someone grew up in Africa, spent many years in Europe, working for 2 corporate organizations here. People assume if when you ask, you are doing a favor for yourself, for them, so that the resource could be used effectively. So we discussed a few things about how to do research, what are things to consider, but don't keep it for yourself. Next time you go to a conversation, someone is presenting to you a project on AI solving this problem, ask those questions wherever you are. That way we can inform each other and potentially we use our research skill to actually make a positive impact on the ground. Thank you very much.
Any questions about the talk?
Thank you for the great talk. What I want to ask you is, how was the transition like from working on your PhD topics on motion analysis, maybe on your postdoc, like on medical applications that might be, applicable also to the Western, to coming back to Africa and then work on impactful works specifically to Africans? What made you decide that? How was the transition like?
That's a good question. I think I don't know. So most of the moves I made are right and wrong, but I always have the motive to use whatever I know to make a difference. And you just decide with the information, the resource you have at the moment. You don't realize that after 20 years, I will find it myself in Kenya, but you always think, I want to learn more, to do research. And some of the things I purposely do, as you see, I try to connect with people. When I apply for programs, I remember I applied for programs that engage with different groups, researchers. I knew I will never forever be in Europe. I know one day I will be back. So my design was trying to explore as much as possible, work, learn a different language, go to different people, and then finally came in. The transition, some of them happen without thinking too much, but I never stood on one solution, what I know, and trying to always use that opportunity. Whatever next opportunity came in, if it's a new thing to learn, it is something I usually just jump. And that always makes you, I mean, in my team, I have people who knows better geospatial imagery. They have been working for long than I know. I learned from them. So transition is not the fun thing. Usually you move country, you move culture, you move place, you move what you are working on. And it may not be easy, but the positive is what I learned. I did all this diverse experience help you to understand things better. I don't know whether it's a success or not in the future, but so far I try to use that design thinking and I try not to stay too long in one spot, in one place, trying to learn, connect, move. And then probably now I'm trying to do what I always envisioned to do, trying to use little things I know, but to make a practical change on the ground. Yeah, that's it.
Hey, I just don't know where is Egypt from these projects, and if there is something in the vaccines, I don't know. I want to know it.
Very good question. In fact, we were trying to have a team in Egypt because The one of the climate conversations into 2 years ago, it happened in Egypt, as you know, and we really worked hard to hire a few people in Egypt, but logistic and other things didn't realize much. But I am already having a few conversations because Microsoft has also big presence in there, and they saw what we are doing, and now we are trying to converse with them and how we could help with Egypt. But importantly, we don't develop a solution practically for one. Usually, how we, as I said, we don't say, and let's go project do in Mali. No, people who knows the project, who knows the problem, come to us, and we try to prioritize and go there. So we already have some conversation, but also if more requests come in, that's how we operate. And we are also a small team. You saw the number of projects we are leading here, just 5 people. And I don't know if I make it clear. AI for Good Love is philanthropy in a way. We don't sell product. We work with Kenya Space Agency, and that's it. It's free of cost because our currency is impact, and we are very selective to with whom we work. All right. Otherwise, we are always open to and scale some of the things we do just beyond Egypt, actually, even beyond Africa. But don't forget that we are not even 2 years since we start this work here in Kenya. Yeah. March 2000 last year. So one year and 4 months. Yeah.
And how do you decide on, like, what is the pipeline usually to get on to get a project into your, like, for someone in a particular country or some organization in a particular country to start working with you? What's that process?
Good question. So the first thing is we sit down together and we try to understand as much as possible about the problem. We have a few already on the pipeline, right? And as I said, always when someone said, Microsoft AI for Good, can you do together with us? Some of the questions are probably motivated by, we don't cost you money, right? But at the same time, we say, tell us more about your problem. All the things I shared with you today, how practical is this problem to be tried with AI? What's your data? Who is going to use it? What kind of impact are you going to achieve? Are you just a small thing just to facilitate your day-to-day activity? Or are you a decision maker at the Ministry of Agriculture? If we do this right, the impact would be great going forward. And we call it project scoping process. We spend a lot of time, weekly meeting, just try to understand what we are and what we know and what we don't know, the same. Once all this is finalized, we try to bring all those different requests and pick based on the priority we give. Our priority is impact, sure. So usually we are open to engage a conversation with anyone who has interesting problem, but the process will follow and we will pick projects and partners that would help us build an impactful solution on the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you also offer support after the solution is being built?
Exactly. That's a good point. The sustainability part of it's also how we select a project. We work with Kenya Space Agency because we know that once we develop the solution, there are people, experts, we learn from each other. Even when we are gone, they don't need us. And we also check that because if you don't have that skill, maybe what we develop may be left over on the shelf, and that's not the kind of output we want. Then we provide that sustainability, but also we bring that question in the problem pipeline, right? Who are you? What kind of resource do you have? Then the kind of solution we develop would be dependent on that resource you have on the ground so that you will be less dependent. But some of the partners could keep collaborating with us because you first work with one county for Kenya and you could always scale it up, but that's how we frame collaborations.
Thanks for the very good presentation. I wanted to understand about your partnership on the project for the new EU law on deforestation.
Yeah.
What is the partnership framework like?
So that's actually a project I myself leading. The partners at the moment are Kenya Space Agency, Murang'a County, which is the region in Kenya, and Clark University. They have geospatial teams there. And we use data from Maxar technology, high resolution imagery. And the Muranga is where we try to start with simple, specific area, because we don't want to claim that first we are doing this for Kenya. Let it get it right first with Muranga. Even I found that's difficult actually. But once we do that, definitely we could scale it up into Kenya and beyond.
Can it be reproduced into other locations besides Kenya?
That's a good question, but often easier for us because our main data stream is satellite imagery. And that one doesn't really care much about the boundary you have between Tanzania and Kenya, and Ethiopia, right? So of course, out of distribution, local context always be there to calibrate your model. But the way we do it is do it for Kenya, Muranga, Kenya, and potentially we are having a conversation with Rwanda Space Agency. If it goes right, it will be scaling that solution to another country. As I said, we don't always we have a solution. You wanted Malawi, Nigeria, we don't do that. But when the requests came in, we try to see how different engagements could coordinate, combine, so that we put less effort, but we could maximize the scale. Thank you.
Hi. Okay, so most of your presentation was on okay, not most. There was a section of your presentation that was on AI was on just wildlife conservation. And I know Microsoft has worked a lot on mega detector, and it's being used a lot in
what detector? Sorry.
Mega detector.
Mega detector.
Yeah.
Explain that a bit more.
It's like it's a YOLO model that was trained on
the camera track.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just wondering whether you could give some more insight into AI for wildlife conservation in Kenya and in East Africa. Well, what someone personally I do work on like AI for conservation. I would want to know what I can do more and how I can actually benefit society. And the last one is a bit very specific. There's these two rhinos in Kenya, Ansu and Fati, the last two northern white rhinos. Microsoft is a very large organization, and the last two, and they're both female. I was wondering if if impact is your currency, whether you're interested in like particularly finding a way to sort that, or like join in that engagement of trying to like reclaim that species. Yeah.
So if I remember questions correctly, the first one is how do you do more on conservation? So Akram, he was not here. He is the one leading the project. So in a team, everyone has a responsibility to lead technically a few projects. And I could definitely connect you with him. You can take my email from Raul or Sefala. If you want to know more, there are a few things out there you could refer. The second thing is, could you expand it to rhinos? There are a lot of problems in agriculture. All those I mentioned, we are actually the tip of the iceberg in a way. It could be more complex, more diversity of those problems. We are not actually working on that. And I don't have even much knowledge about the problem. But if there is an organization, an institution, and group of people who knows the problem better, so that they could help us understand, and then, as Sefal asked me, then we can think of, is it the right project to work on, to collaborate, and that's how usually the conversation goes on. But are you affiliated with any institution, organization, or?
Myself, I work for DCL, Center for Data Science in Dedan Kimathi.
Okay.
I do know specifically with Ansu and Fati, there's an organization called BioRescue that's been trying to find a way to get. Okay, Ansu and Fati are both female. The male passed away like 6 years ago.
Okay.
And unfortunately, now Ansu and Fati can't actually like bear. They can't get pregnant. So they've been trying to do surrogacy. using a different species. There are northern white rhinos. There's trying to use southern white rhinos. Last year, they were actually able to get one to hold the pregnancy for around a month, but she passed away due to certain medical reasons. And a rhinos actually gestate for 24 months. So yeah, if it doesn't work out with Anso and Fati, that subspecies of rhino is gone. And rhinos are quite important, especially honestly, as much as people say elephants are the symbol of East Africa, no. East Africa and Central Africa, the symbol is the rhino. So if they start passing away, that will be sad. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have knowledge nor the skill on that aspect, but we have quite a few interactions with the Dankamat University. But if you, I mean, I will connect with you, Akram, and potentially we could engage the conversation. But by now, you know how we operate and how small the team and the bandwidth we have. Being aware of that, let's keep the conversation. This seems like an interesting problem, and maybe we need to understand better going forward. But at the moment, we are not working on that. I don't think we also have the skill to work on that kind of problem. But let's see if there's anything we could help with.
Hi again.
Hush.
Okay. I noticed from participation in Daba here and other communities like Sisongitek and
Yeah.
Masakana, the South Africa presence is much better. I don't mean the country itself. I mean the area. Much more people than North. From your experience, what do you advise us to be more engaged in the community?
So if I understand it correctly, how we engage more on the grassroots communities like Indaba, is
In
that
the north, how do you get more engagements with North Africans? Because there's a lot of engagements with the Southern.
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we always need to work more, but as far um so how people start. I mean, um start looking for communities that are working similar to your areas. I know Indaba 2022 was in Tunis, and last year myself and Akram, we were also participant in Indaba X Morocco actually. And there is like from Kenya all the way to Rabat, and I was in Rabat in January this year as well. It's getting better, but this is grassroots community always. I mean, Asala is here, a very good example, all the way from Algeria. First time I met her, it was in Cape Town, and it was a different story. After that, she write a paper, and she's here in Kenya. So try to, I mean, you guys are much smarter than we are. Try to be open to communities, Raul, people you connect to, engage yourself. Your space in IBM, we used to say the world is our lab, but it's not your university, your lab. It's the world. Then try to connect with people wherever they are, starting with communities in Dawa, Data Science Africa, Masakane, Sisewin Bank, all those. We recently created actually Geo AI community here in Africa. So open to that digital world. It shouldn't be difficult to find each other and then connect and build the community. And I mean, this year we are going to Senegal, right? Indawa is going to Dakar. So all these efforts help to bring together people. And as long as you try, I'm sure the way the Africa work, we have always that community spirit, right? We are not huge.
Yeah. Who do you market to?
But one important thing, I mean, I understand you are interested in community engagement and all that. Sefala, myself, Raul could connect with great people we know already in Egypt, right? So that they are Egyptian, you are Egyptian, then they could also be a proxy. Yeah? I right? Okay, those, but also not just Egypt. You need to like what's happening in Morocco.
I mean, for everyone, not only for Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, Safala is also have such a good experience in the communities in the continent. You could add a few more. How? Yeah. All right. Okay. Good.
Oh, and another thing, I've seen that the universities that you guys collaborate with are usually not African. What is your plan on engaging African universities?
That's a good point. That's something we want to do. In fact, we start a conversation with the Dankamati. Something I didn't mention is that these are like projects, but also as a part of grassroots communities, we go to local universities and do presentations, workshop, but not actively on a project. Those universities in the US usually they came with a partner, right? If you say Kenya Wildlife Trust, they have been working with this university XYZ, so they will be part of the conversation when try to address them, because sometimes you may be surprised there are many external universities doing research in Kenya in conservation more than Kenyan universities doing it, right? But that should improve always. And the kind of collaboration is also different. For local universities, we help in tutorial, curriculum revision and all that. For the others, they are doing research, so we collaborate in research. So maybe I didn't show it here, but we have that local engagement. We always being called to participate.
Amazing. Maybe we can finish the conversation here. Yeah, and get more questions from here. Just so you're in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
My question was regarding like, if you have like collaborations with others, have you and your team ever encountered an issue whereby you don't really know how to move forward with it, right? So let's say you're presented with a problem and you don't know you don't know the immediate solution, right? So like how does it come into play? I assume that you consult with experts on the team, or you're providing AI solutions. So do you and your team know how to solve most of these problems? And if you don't, how do you go about it?
Good question. Do you know the solutions? No. That's a part of the learning experience, and that's a part of also why we are a research team. So you always think AI could help in a background, but that's not always the case. That's why I said you bring a problem to me, I try to understand more the problem, then I try to think whether AI could help it. If it is AI, of course, we work across different domain. It's less important sometimes whether it's satellite imagery, tabular data, time series, whatsoever. It's a different data stream, but we could always try to speculate what kind of solution it could be. Do we get it right in the first instance? No. You always try to iterate. You try something, you go back to those partners. Is it how you think what's right, what's wrong? You learn, you iterate, you learn, you iterate that way. We try to probably go to a solution, but you always don't know the solution in the first hand unless you spend time to understand the problem better.
And one last question. What's the beauty of like applying your research within the industry? You get the opportunity to like apply your research like for good, AI for good, which is a good initiative, right? Or which is a good application. But what's the beauty of this? Like, let's say compared to other research labs that may be within a company.
That's a good question. The beauty of my work, if I make it personal, is I studied electrical engineering background, undergrad, master's in telecom, computer vision, PhD, and postdoc times race. I never thought I will spend most of my time talking with agronomists, doctors, clinicians, and that's the beauty. And you know how much you don't know when you talk to these people, right? And that's a great opportunity. As I said, as an African, I always try to use whatever I know to make things better on the ground. And you talk to medical doctors, nurses, agronomists, and people who know, and then you learn every day, and you don't get this opportunity often, and that is a beauty. And the other beauty is like, I don't need to sell you a product, right? Even if I'm in a big company, when I talk to you, it's just to understand the problem. I'm not trying to sell you a product and get revenue. That's not, I'm free of that. And usually you don't get that opportunity. Just do on the problem you like, makes it a problem closer to your heart. But at the same time, you are not asked to generate money, how much you make. No. Is your solution impactful, Girmaw, on the ground? And then that's a bit of a challenge sometimes, because to make an impactful solution, it's not AI. That's always like people, you work with some may have different background, different research, that different timeline, right? I went to a meeting and I was asked to pray for the meeting, because that community, that partners, usually they start meetings with prayer, and you don't expect that to happen. And this is like a beauty of working with different people, right?
Thank you.
You're a manager. When people apply for internships, what are some of the things that make an application stand out when it gets to your desk?
Good question. Usually, as a research team, we hire interns, not only us, also the other research team in Microsoft. And you know that most of the problems we have are continent specific, and we try to get as many people as here. But if I'm trying to be honest, there is a misunderstanding of what industry usually require versus what students think it is enough. It's not the skill. The skill is there, but usually when you present yourself, first thing, the way you present your CV, as simple as that. And to arrive at my desk, it needs to pass through recruiters and all that. So I always feel we know that as Africa, we focus on the work and the content, but also it's important also how it appears, how you present yourself, how you present your CV, how you present. If you send me 13-page CV, that's like, these are a few things as an African people not are aware, but these minimal things usually affect someone's decision in the pipeline. And that's what I usually say, how to write CV, how to, putting CV in Microsoft Word versus in Overleaf has a difference in how it appears to begin with. Second, trying to be selective of what you have done, trying to relate what is recruiting, what is the opportunity versus your skill. Today, I didn't present to you all the collaboration we do with local universities in organizing curriculum, revisiting whatsoever, because I thought maybe this is the content I want to share with you. When you apply for that internship position, what is the skills? What are the people? What of my experience skill may fit there? So try to be selective in applying is important, because I did it the same, like 20 years ago when I applied for postgraduate internship. You always use the same CV. If you spend 30 minutes, differentiated, calibrated, that's a difference. But I'm always confident that there is a skill in the continent. That's why we are here. That's why we are building all the solution all the way from Kenya to the world, right? I have no question about that, but trying to be more mindful of who is hiring, what kind of position, how I can present my CV, my skill set, my experience to that position is always important. Yeah.
Another question is that when you think about the Africa team here at Microsoft, how does it compare to like the other Microsoft teams that work on maybe similar solutions, but in different places? Why, if I have an opportunity, I should be thinking about joining this team rather than another team?
So now I have to put my picture. As I said, I'm very open to people to work with different teams, different countries, cultures. That's important. But what I'm very confident about is the kind of problem we are working on. They don't generate money most of the time, but it gives you the opportunity. And if you are working on driverless car, probably our team is not the best fit. In fact, my PhD topic, wearable camera, is easily associated with driverless car, but agriculture, food security, water security, these kind of problems, we probably, there are not many opportunities that work on that problem. It's not just writing paper, working with Kenya Space Agency, working with Kenya Wildlife Trust, Smithsonian Institute, all health minister, all the partners we have, gives you the practicality of the problem. And if you are someone who wants to work on such a problem, I think there are not many teams like we do.
Do we have more questions on the floor? I guess this was the fireside chat. Do we have more questions on the floor? Okay. The last question that I'd like to ask is, when you think about, I mean, I guess it's like mostly the conversations I've been having with other people here, they think about being trained elsewhere, but their passion lies with coming back to the continent. How practical is it to have that kind of a vision or a goal in this climate?
Good question. 15, 16 years ago, there were not many opportunities like we have here. And I don't think that is the case nowadays. Usually for African researcher students, I always say, you have all the resources at your fingerprint now. And you don't need to go now. Raul and people are already coming to the continent, right? The content is there, the opportunity is there, the community is there. But at the same time, I also agree that you need different mindset, you need different culture. I lived in Barcelona for a year as a visitor. I learned the language and all that. That gives you, different perspective, understanding of things in life. And I'm happy to call like friends, colleagues all over the world. That's always important. As that's what I said earlier. Your love is the world. Even if you sit in Egypt, in Dhaka, you need to connect with community virtually, physically, visit there and all that. But to do a good research, to do something, you all have all the resources in the continent. You may have your own challenge, but everywhere you go, there is a challenge for sure. But really, really be mindful of the opportunity we have here. In Kenya, all the big companies are here, even hiring as a researcher nowadays. And usually, honestly speaking, when you try to hire, we don't really get the people immediately to those positions. That's why usually we go out. So because people are trying to go out and others are trying to come in. So be mindful of the opportunity we have, the grassroots community. And if you have a chance to go, spend time with Raul's lab and learn some experience, but don't undermine the opportunity you have, the grassroots community you have, the digital content you could just acquire from your desk here in Africa.
Well, thank you so much for all the advice. Thank you so much for the great talk. And thank you so much for coming and spending some of the days with us. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.